morning and good afternoon to all those that are joining us today. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about this subject. In the last few months, I've had a lot of different colleagues and clients spend some time talking with me about the issue of culture. And it's a topic that's robust. An hour will probably not even do us justice to be able to get through this subject. But hopefully we can uncover a couple of key principles and even some frameworks and tools to help us to begin to think about, from an executive level, how we can use culture to our advantage and, if possible, even shape it in a way that will become differentiating for us and help us deliver our strategy. Before we get into the content of today's particular subject, I do want to just give a little bit of background for those that might be new joining us. I am the managing director of AlignOrg Solutions, and we're a niche consultancy that specializes in helping organizations understand how they want to win in the marketplace, assess their organization for how effective they will be in actually delivering in the marketplace, and then certainly we focus on helping organizations set up an organization, their design, if you will, to be effective. And then we work with them as well around how to effectively implement the changes that they envision so that they can ultimately deliver what their organization wants to achieve. Most of the work that we do is actually rolling up our sleeves and doing it with our clients. We have a fairly unique methodology and way of engaging with our clients that allows both those that are working on this from inside of an organization and also from our perspective coming from the outside to partner in pretty constructive ways to get good outcomes in ways that maintains and establishes ownership internally. The other part of what we do is we help build capability with those that are wanting to learn some of the same techniques, tools, methodologies that we use in our practice that they can use internally so that they can drive the kinds of organization transformations that they need to do internally as well. Some of the things that we'll talk about today, some of the stories that will be shared will come from organizations that we've learned from. Some of these are organizations we've worked with directly, and others are ones that we've read about or that are certainly great case studies. And we find that by looking at different case studies and stories, we can gain some pretty important insights. So we're excited to get started on today's topic. We're glad you're with us, and as Vonnie said, would like to invite questions throughout. I know that we don't have a live interchange among us, but at least the questions that come in will allow me to make adjustments and tailor comments and remarks that might be beneficial to those listening in. So thanks for being with us, and let's dive in. You know, I want to share a couple of key concepts here, and you can already see them on the page. But before I do, I sort of want to address the idea of why culture is such a compelling notion for executives and for organizations. You know, there are certain organizations that seem to be acknowledged for having, you know, a great culture. Google, for one, Zappos back in the day before it was acquired by Amazon, and even the Amazon culture at times is called out as being an interesting or a differentiating culture. We also hear stories, and recently in the news we've heard a story of United Airlines where the culture was perhaps a contributing factor in some of the negativity that emerged in their organization when they ended up not treating a customer the way that they thought they wanted to. So culture is certainly a compelling notion, but it also becomes a little bit of a blame game when things don't go well. Well, it's our culture, or our culture is not the way Google's culture is, and therefore it's difficult to compete. So rather than make it a blame or make it something that's too big for us ever to accomplish, I'd like to try to break the idea of culture down into some principles that I think are very tangible and actionable. So one of the first sort of principles here that underpins the way we think about culture as we work with organizations is, first, culture is and can be a competitive differentiator when it's aligned to strategy. So I've worked with one organization that really stood out to me. It was a great company. I loved working with them, and I'll leave them nameless for obvious reasons. But one of the things that really set them apart was their desire to be innovative. And they did some of the things that you hear about in super innovative organizations. They had very flexible work hours. Their workspace was very dynamic and creative. Lots of colors. There was toys. There was things all over the wall. I mean, it was very non-traditional. They allowed people to wear whatever they wanted to wear into work. They encouraged all kinds of expression. I mean, it was just a very interesting sort of environment. But the irony was they were struggling because the innovation that they needed to win in their strategy was not forthcoming. So they had done a whole lot of things to try to create a culture, but unfortunately it was not leading to the strategic outcome they wanted. And so that begs the question then, if culture can be a differentiator, how do we help shape it and guide it to a place where it's driving strategy? So that's kind of the first concept. Second fundamental concept is this: there are many factors that really help build, reinforce, and transfer culture to the members of an organization. I bet any of us who have joined a company in the course of our careers have come in and in some form or fashion, whether it be through the new employee orientation, whether it be from just walking the halls and seeing the artifacts, the things like that, you begin to get a sense of culture. And the way in which culture is transferred is an important variable. And then the final notion is, even though culture can be a powerful dynamic, it's not necessarily easy to change or to shape. In fact, I had a colleague once who used to sort of say this. He'd say, you know, trying to change culture is like wrestling with a marshmallow. No matter how much you dish out, the marshmallow just sort of absorbs it and returns back to its original shape and size. And culture is a lot like that. You know, you can put initiatives in place, you can change some leadership tactics, you can change the messaging. There's a lot of things that can be done, but at the end of the day, it sort of returns back to its shape and its focus. And so this is one of the underlying things that makes culture and shaping it such a challenging endeavor. Despite those challenges, however, we believe there are some ways to do this. And so what we'd like to do now is get into some of the keys that we've found to understanding and then ultimately impacting culture. The three keys that we want to touch on today is, first, the belief that culture is both a cause and an effect in the organization. Now, that might sound a little bit odd. In a minute, we'll break that down a bit more. The second key that we want to touch on is that culture is more than a mindset. It really has to become embedded into the DNA and the choices of the organization if it's really going to last. Otherwise, it'll sort of bounce back like the marshmallow. And then the third notion, the one that we constantly hear about when we, talk amongst ourselves, when we read things, is that culture always will trump strategy, no matter how good our strategy is. So that begs the question then, well, what then could trump culture? And so those are the three sort of topics that we want to dive into here. And so without further ado, let's jump into the first one, which is culture is both a cause and an effect. And the way we like to think about this is the culture, because it has been shaped in whatever way it has been. It could be a defining moment of the founder. It could be through a crisis the organization has come through. It could be just through, whatever events have occurred. The culture becomes a reality. And because it is a reality, it starts to cause us as an organization to make choices, and it begins to shape and drive the way we do things. At the same time, because it's causing us to do that, it is reinforcing and, in a sense, becoming an effect at the same time. And so the cause and effect dynamic of culture is one of the things that makes it so difficult to change. Now, the way we like to think about this in a little bit more of a conceptual but somewhat practical way is to think about the organization choices that exist in your company. It could be the way you reward performance. It could be the way that you've set up your physical facilities. It could be the way that work processes are done. It could be the way you're structured, any number of organization choices have a tendency to drive and or reinforce a culture. And the culture, of course, is this notion of these intangible assumptions, beliefs, even behaviors or norms that exist in an organization that perhaps sometimes explicitly, but sometimes inexplicitly, shape the way that people think and act. And those choices that we were just talking about have a great determination on what culture ends up coming forward. Because that culture gets formed, that begins to shape the way that we make decisions around here, what's important to us, how we go about making decisions. Sometimes I walk into organizations and I hear complaints about a command and control type of culture. Well, that's simply a manifestation of choices that have been made over time, and now we're living with the reality day in and day out of the way that choices get made of being a command and control type environment. We've also seen organizations complain about everything gets made through consensus or committee. Well, that decision-making model is often a result of a culture that was driven by some set of choices that the organization made, either intentionally or unintentionally, over the course of its history. And of course, this is self-reinforcing, which means that the choices drove the culture shapes how we make decisions, and because that's shaping how we make decisions, it in turn drives the way we make new choices. And so when we sit back and we look at this dynamic, it begs the question, well, where can you intervene to make a difference?